I stood behind the marble column at the Belfield Hotel ballroom, watching my sister's wedding reception unfold like a performance I had no role in. The column was cold against my back, and I pressed myself closer to it, hoping to disappear entirely. From this angle, I could see everything while remaining invisible to the 200 guests who filled the space with laughter and champagne toasts. My sister Victoria had always been the golden child. At 28, she had secured everything our parents had ever dreamed of for us. A thriving career as a pharmaceutical sales director, a penthouse apartment in downtown Seattle, and now a husband whose family owned half the commercial real estate in the Pacific Northwest. I had received my invitation 3 weeks before the ceremony, a cream-colored card that arrived with no personal note, just my name printed in elegant script alongside a table assignment. Table 37. I had searched for it when I first arrived, weaving through the beautifully decorated space with its cascading floral arrangements and crystal chandeliers. Table 37 turned out to be tucked in the far corner of the ballroom, partially obscured by this very column, with a clear view of absolutely nothing. The other chairs at the table remained empty throughout the cocktail hour. I learned later that Victoria had assigned it to distant cousins who had declined their invitations months ago. So I stood instead, clutching a glass of water that had gone warm in my hand. My dress was simple compared to the designer gowns swirling around me, a navy blue sheath I had purchased on sale 3 months earlier when Victoria finally confirmed I was invited. She had called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice bright and busy. "Caroline, I know we have not talked much lately, but family is important. You should be there. I will have someone send you the details." That phone call had been our longest conversation in 2 years. I watched Victoria now, radiant in her custom wedding gown, her dark hair swept into an intricate updo that had probably taken hours to perfect. She moved through the crowd like royalty, her hand resting possessively on her new husband's arm. Gregory was everything she had wanted. Handsome, wealthy, and completely devoted to maintaining the image she had cultivated. They stopped at each table, accepting congratulations and posing for photographs, their smiles never faltering. My parents stood near the head table, beaming with pride. My father had given a toast during dinner, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke about his remarkable daughter and how she had exceeded every expectation. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, her jewelry catching the light with every movement. Neither of them had acknowledged my presence beyond a brief nod when I arrived for the ceremony at the church. The distance between us had not always been this vast. There was a time when Victoria and I had been close, or at least I remembered it that way. We had shared a bedroom until I was 12, whispered secrets after our parents turned off the lights, made plans for futures we would build together. But something shifted when we entered high school. Victoria discovered she had a talent for being exactly what people wanted her to be, while I struggled to figure out who I was at all. She joined every club, won every award, dated the captain of the football team. I spent my time in the library, reading books and writing in journals I kept hidden under my mattress. Our parents' attention followed Victoria's trajectory, their praise and pride flowing toward her like water finding its level. I became the backup, the spare, the one they mentioned as an afterthought when people asked about their children. "Victoria is doing wonderfully at her new job," my mother would say at family gatherings. Then, almost as a footnote, "And Caroline is working at that little bookstore downtown." The bookstore was not little. It was a beloved independent shop that had been serving the Seattle community for 40 years, and I had worked my way up to assistant manager. I took pride in my recommendations, in the window displays I created, in the author events I organized. But none of that mattered to my family. Victoria sold pharmaceuticals to hospitals and medical practices, driving a company car and wearing expensive suits. That was success in their eyes. My career was just something to do while I figured out my real life. I shifted my weight, my heels beginning to pinch after hours of standing. A server passed by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, but he did not see me behind the column. I had stopped trying to flag down the waitstaff after the first hour. It was easier to remain invisible than to watch them look through me as though I were made of glass. Victoria's laughter rang out across the ballroom, clear and bright. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids now, women I recognized from photographs on her social media, but had never actually met. They were all beautiful, all successful, all perfect reflections of the life she had built. I had not been asked to be a bridesmaid. Victoria had explained it simply when I questioned her months ago. The girls all know each other from work and college. It would be awkward for you. The DJ announced the first dance, and the crowd shifted, everyone moving toward the dance floor to watch. I stayed where I was, partially hidden, my back against the cold marble. This was my role in Victoria's perfect day. Present enough to check a box, invisible enough not to disturb the carefully crafted image. I was family, but only in the technical sense. The first dance ended to enthusiastic applause, and the DJ invited other couples to join the newlyweds on the floor. I watched my parents walk out together, my father's hand on my mother's waist, both of them glowing with happiness. The ballroom filled with swirling movement, dresses and suits blending into a kaleidoscope of celebration. I remained motionless behind my column, a statue in navy blue. Terrible spot for watching a wedding, is it not? I jumped at the voice, turning to find a man standing beside me. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and an expression that seemed caught between amusement and sympathy. His suit was perfectly tailored, and there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested confidence without arrogance. He held 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to me. "I saw you standing here alone," he continued when I did not immediately respond. "Thought you might prefer something better than whatever is in that glass." I looked down at my warm water, then back at him. "Thank you, but I am fine." "Are you?" He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "Because from where I am standing, you look like someone who is working very hard at not being noticed." The accuracy of his observation stung. I straightened my shoulders, attempting to look less pathetic than I felt. "I am just enjoying the view." "From behind a column?" He smiled, not unkindly. "Come on, at least take the champagne. It is excellent, and it would be a shame to waste it." I accepted the glass, primarily because refusing felt like it would draw more attention. He clinked his glass gently against mine, a soft sound that was swallowed by the music and conversation surrounding us. "I am Daniel," he said. "And before you ask, no, I do not usually approach random women at weddings, but I also do not usually see someone looking quite as miserable as you do while standing at what is supposed to be a celebration." "I am not miserable," I lied. "Right. You are just really fond of architectural features." He leaned against the column beside me, looking out at the crowd. "Let me guess. Bride's side or groom's side?" "Bride's sister." His eyebrows rose slightly. "And they put you back here?" I requested a quiet spot. Another lie, but I had no intention of explaining my family dynamics to a stranger at my sister's wedding reception. Daniel did not seem convinced, but he did not push. Instead, he surveyed the ballroom with the calm assessment of someone who was accustomed to reading rooms and people. "Your sister seems very happy." "She is." That, at least, was true. Victoria had achieved exactly what she wanted. This wedding was the culmination of years of careful planning and strategic choices. She had selected Gregory the same way she selected everything else in her life, with precision and an eye toward maximum advantage. "What about you?" Daniel asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. No one in my family had asked me that in years. Happiness was not a metric they considered relevant to my life. They asked Victoria about her happiness constantly, monitored it, made adjustments to ensure she maintained her perfect trajectory. But me? I was just expected to exist on the periphery, grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. "I am fine," I said, taking a sip of the champagne. It was excellent, crisp and cold, with bubbles that tickled my throat. "That is not what I asked," I met his gaze, surprised by the directness. There was something in his expression that reminded me of the way I looked at customers at the bookstore when I was trying to find exactly the right book for them. That focused attention that suggested genuine interest, rather than polite obligation. "Why do you care?" I asked, more curious than defensive. Maybe because I know what it feels like to be the person standing in the corner at a family event, wondering why you bothered to show up. He shrugged. Or maybe I just hate seeing good champagne go to waste on someone who is not enjoying themselves. Despite everything, I almost smiled. The champagne is not wasted. Good. He shifted his position, angling himself so he was facing me rather than the crowd. So tell me, Caroline. I did not tell you my name. I heard your mother mention it earlier when she was talking to someone about the seating arrangements. Something about hoping you would not cause any issues. His expression remained neutral, but I could see the disapproval in his eyes. Families can be complicated. That was an understatement so massive it bordered on comedy. I took another sip of champagne, feeling the alcohol begin to warm me from the inside. Did you come to this wedding alone? I did. I know Gregory through business. Our companies work together occasionally. He paused, then added, I almost did not come, actually. These events can be tedious when you do not know many people, but now I am glad I did. Why is that? Because I met you. The words should have sounded like a line, practiced and insincere, but something in his delivery made them feel genuine. I studied him more carefully, taking in the details I had missed during my initial assessment. He wore his expensive suit with the ease of someone accustomed to formal events, but there was a warmth in his expression that suggested he did not take himself too seriously. His hands were steady on his champagne glass, no nervous fidgeting or constant checking of his phone like I had seen from so many other guests throughout the evening. You do not even know me, I pointed out. Not yet. He smiled. But the night is young, and you are clearly the most interesting person at this reception. That is not a high bar. Maybe not, but I stand by the statement. He glanced toward the dance floor, where Victoria was now dancing with Gregory's father, her smile camera-ready and bright. What do you say we make this evening more interesting? What do you mean? Daniel set his empty champagne glass on a nearby table, then held out his hand to me. Trust me and pretend you are my guest. I stared at his outstretched hand, confusion mixing with curiosity. What are you talking about? I have an idea, Daniel said, his expression shifting to something more serious. But it requires you to trust me, which I realize is a lot to ask from someone you just met. An idea about what? About making sure you are not forgotten at your own sister's wedding. He kept his hand extended, patient. I promise I am not suggesting anything inappropriate or dangerous. Just a small intervention that might change how the rest of this evening goes. I looked past him to the dance floor, where Victoria was now being twirled by one of Gregory's groomsmen. Her laughter carried across the ballroom, and I saw my mother watching her with undisguised adoration. No one was looking in my direction. No one had looked in my direction all evening, except this stranger who had somehow found me hiding behind a marble column. Why would you do this? I asked. You do not know me. You do not know anything about my situation. Call it a character flaw. Daniel lowered his hand slightly but did not withdraw it entirely. I have trouble watching people be treated poorly, especially at events that are supposed to be about family and celebration. And I have resources that could make a difference if you are willing to let me use them. Resources? He smiled, but there was something enigmatic about it. Just trust me. What do you have to lose? The question hung in the air between us. What did I have to lose? I had already lost my family's attention, my sister's affection, any sense of belonging in this glittering celebration. I was a ghost at my own sister's wedding, present but unseen, acknowledged but not valued. Daniel was offering me something different, though I did not fully understand what. I drained the rest of my champagne, feeling the bubbles give me courage I did not normally possess. Okay. I will trust you. For tonight. I took his hand, surprised by how warm his grip was, how steady. But if this turns into something weird, I am leaving. Fair enough. He squeezed my hand gently, then led me away from the column. First things first. You need to stop hiding. We walked through the crowd together, and I was acutely aware of his hand in mine, the way people's eyes tracked our movement. Daniel navigated the ballroom with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going, though he had claimed not to know many people here. He stopped at a table near the front, where several people in expensive suits were engaged in animated conversation. "Excuse me," Daniel said, his voice cutting politely through their discussion. "I need to borrow Caroline for a moment." The way he said my name, as though I were important, as though everyone should know who I was, made something in my chest tighten. The people at the table looked at me with new interest, and I saw calculation in their eyes as they tried to place me, to understand my connection to this confident man who commanded attention without apparent effort. We moved on before I could process their reactions. Daniel continued through the ballroom, stopping at several more tables, always introducing me as though I were a valued guest rather than the forgotten sister. Each time people perked up, their expressions shifting from disinterest to curiosity. I saw some of them glance toward the head table where Victoria sat, as if trying to understand the dynamics they had missed. "What are you doing?" I whispered, during a pause in his circuit. "Changing the narrative," he replied simply. "By the end of the evening, people will remember you are here. They will remember your name, and your sister will have to acknowledge you. She still will not care. Maybe not, but at least she will notice." He looked at me seriously. Sometimes that is the first step. Being seen before you can be valued. We approached another group, and Daniel launched into conversation with an ease that suggested years of practice at networking events. He drew me into the discussion naturally, asking my opinion on books when the conversation turned to literature, mentioning my work at the bookstore with a respect that made it sound important rather than frivolous. I found myself relaxing slightly, my responses becoming less stilted as the champagne and Daniel's presence combined to loosen the tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. The DJ announced that dinner would be served shortly, and people began returning to their tables. Daniel walked me back toward the corner where table 37 sat in its lonely isolation, but he did not leave me there. Instead, he pulled out one of the empty chairs and sat down across from me. "You cannot sit here," I said. "This is not your table." "I know. My table is up front near the wedding party." He settled into the chair as though he belonged there. "But I like the view better from here." "There is no view from here. That is the point." "I disagree." He looked at me directly. "I think the view is excellent." Before I could respond, a server appeared with our dinner plates. The meal was identical to what everyone else was receiving: herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables and wild rice. Daniel thanked the server and began eating, completely at ease in his chosen seat at table 37. I picked at my food, still processing the past 30 minutes. Daniel had appeared out of nowhere and somehow convinced me to let him parade me around the ballroom as though I mattered. Part of me wanted to be angry at the manipulation, but a larger part was simply grateful for the attention, for being treated like a person worthy of notice rather than an obligation to be managed. "So what happens now?" I asked between bites. Daniel looked up from his plate, his expression thoughtful. "Now we wait for the real interesting part of the evening." "Which is?" "You will see." He smiled, and there was something in that smile that suggested he knew more than he was saying. "Trust me, Caroline. The night is far from over, and I think you are going to be surprised by how it ends." Dinner progressed with excruciating slowness. Daniel maintained his position at table 37, seemingly unconcerned about the curious glances from other guests who had noticed his absence from his assigned seat. He engaged me in conversation throughout the meal, asking questions about my life with a genuine interest that felt foreign after years of my family's dismissive attention. "So you studied English literature in college?" he asked, setting down his fork. "I did. University of Washington. Nothing fancy." I pushed a piece of salmon around my plate. My parents wanted me to study business like Victoria, but I could not imagine spending 4 years learning about profit margins and market strategies. "There is nothing wrong with following your passion." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed despite the formal setting. "The world needs people who care about stories and books, not just people who know how to maximize shareholder value." "Try telling that to my parents." "I would be happy to." The offer sounded genuine. Sometimes people need to hear things from an outside perspective before they can see value in what is right in front of them. Before I could respond, the DJ's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. The bride and groom would like to say a few words before we continue with the evening's festivities." The lights dimmed slightly, and a spotlight illuminated the head table. Victoria stood, microphone in hand, Gregory beside her with his arm around her waist. She looked radiant, her smile perfect, her dress catching the light in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. This was her moment, the culmination of months of planning and preparation. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," Victoria began, her voice steady and confident. "Gregory and I are so grateful to be surrounded by the people who matter most to us. This day has been absolutely perfect, and it is because of all of you," she went on, thanking specific people by name. Her bridesmaids, who had been so supportive during the planning process. Gregory's parents, who had welcomed her into their family with open arms. Her own parents, who had given her every opportunity to become the woman she is today. The list went on, each acknowledgement met with applause and affectionate murmurs from the crowd. I waited, some small part of me hoping she would mention me. We were sisters. She had invited me, however reluctantly. Surely she would at least acknowledge my presence. But she did not. Victoria moved smoothly from her thank yous to a humorous anecdote about how she and Gregory met, and I realized I had been foolish to expect anything different. I was not part of her narrative, not someone who mattered in the story she was telling about her perfect life. Daniel reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "I am sorry." "For what?" I tried to keep my voice steady. I knew what to expect. "That does not make it hurt less." He was right, though I hated admitting it. I blinked back tears that I refused to let fall. Not here. Not where people might see and judge me for being too emotional or too sensitive. Victoria finished her speech to thunderous applause, and the spotlight faded as the DJ announced a short break before dancing would resume. "Caroline." Daniel's voice was low and serious. "What if I told you I could change what just happened? You cannot change the past." "No, but I can change how people remember this evening, including your sister." He stood, adjusting his suit jacket. "Do you trust me?" "You keep asking me that, because what I am about to do requires your complete trust, and I need to know you are ready." He extended his hand again, the same gesture from earlier, but weighted with new significance. "Take my hand and pretend you are my guest, no matter what happens next. Just follow my lead." The intensity in his expression convinced me more than his words. I placed my hand in his and stood, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Daniel squeezed my fingers gently, then began walking toward the front of the ballroom, pulling me alongside him. People turned to watch us as we moved through the crowd. I saw confusion on some faces, curiosity on others. We passed by table after table until we reached the raised platform where the DJ had set up his equipment. Daniel exchanged a brief word with the DJ, who nodded and handed him the microphone. My stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" Trust me." He stepped onto the small stage area, still holding my hand, pulling me up beside him. The DJ adjusted the spotlight so it illuminated us both, and suddenly we were the center of attention. 200 pairs of eyes focused on our unexpected appearance. Daniel raised the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. I apologize for the interruption, but I realize there is someone here tonight who has not been properly acknowledged, and I think that needs to be corrected." Victoria's face, visible from the stage, showed her first crack of confusion. Gregory leaned over to whisper something to her, but she shook her head, her eyes fixed on Daniel and me. "My name is Daniel Westfield," he continued, and I felt a ripple of recognition move through the crowd at the name. "For those who do not know, I am the CEO of Westfield Properties, and Gregory and I have been doing business together for the past several months." Westfield Properties. Even I recognized that name. It was one of the largest commercial real estate development companies in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of organization that shaped skylines and influenced city planning. Daniel was not just some random guest at this wedding. He was someone important, someone whose opinion and presence carried weight. "I came to this wedding alone," Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "But I was fortunate enough to meet someone this evening who has made the experience memorable. Caroline, the bride's sister, has been absolutely delightful company, and I have to say I am surprised she has been sitting in the back of the room all night when she should be celebrated as part of this family occasion." I felt my face flush as every eye in the ballroom turned to study me with new interest. My parents looked shocked, my mother's hand pressed against her chest. Victoria's expression had shifted from confusion to something that looked suspiciously like panic. Daniel turned to face me, still holding my hand. "Caroline has been telling me about her work at Pemberton Books. Did you all know she manages one of Seattle's most beloved independent bookstores? She is the reason the store has become such an important community gathering space, organizing author events and literary discussions that bring people together." He was making my job sound far more impressive than it was, but the crowd was listening, nodding along as though they had always known this information about me. "I mention this," Daniel continued, "because I am currently developing a new mixed-use property in downtown Seattle, and I have been looking for the right partner to help create a community-focused retail space. After talking with Caroline tonight, I think she would be perfect for consulting on the project." My mouth fell open. This was not just attention. This was opportunity, offered publicly in a way that would be impossible for my family to dismiss or minimize. Daniel continued speaking, his voice confident and warm. "In fact, I would like to formally invite Caroline to join me for a lunch meeting next week to discuss how we might work together. I believe her insights into community building and literary culture would be invaluable for making this project something truly special for Seattle." He handed the microphone back to the DJ, then turned to face me fully, both of his hands now holding mine. "What do you say, Caroline? Are you interested?" I could barely process what was happening. A minute ago, I had been the invisible sister, the afterthought hiding behind a column. Now I was standing on a stage with a CEO who was offering me a professional opportunity in front of my entire family and everyone they considered important. The shift was so dramatic it felt surreal. Yes, I managed, my voice barely audible. Daniel smiled, squeezed my hands, then guided me down from the stage. The crowd erupted in polite applause, and I saw people leaning toward each other, whispering, reassessing me entirely based on this single interaction. I had gone from nobody to somebody in less than 5 minutes, and all because Daniel had decided to shine his spotlight on me. We walked back through the ballroom, but this time people stopped us. Victoria's bridesmaids wanted to introduce themselves properly. Gregory's business associates asked for my contact information. Even some of my parents' friends, people who had watched me grow up but never paid me much attention, suddenly wanted to chat about the bookstore and offer their congratulations on this exciting opportunity. I played along, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, though my mind was racing. Daniel stayed by my side throughout, his presence lending me credibility I had never possessed on my own. When we finally made it back to table 37, I turned to him, questions tumbling over each other in my head. "Is this real?" I asked quietly, aware that people were still watching us. "The consulting opportunity, I mean. It is completely real." Daniel pulled out my chair for me, waiting until I sat before taking his own seat. "I genuinely am developing a new property, and I genuinely believe your perspective would be valuable. I was not lying about anything I said up there. But you made it sound like I am some kind of expert. You are. You just do not see it because your family has spent years convincing you that your work does not matter." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Caroline, you have been managing a successful independent bookstore in an era when most of them are closing. You create events that bring communities together. You understand how physical spaces can foster connection and culture. Those are exactly the skills I need for this project. So this was not just about making my sister uncomfortable. Making your sister uncomfortable was a bonus." He smiled, but there was steel underneath it. "The real goal was making sure you were seen and valued, which you deserved from the moment you walked into this reception." Movement near the head table caught my attention. Victoria was standing, her expression tight, speaking urgently to Gregory. She kept glancing in our direction, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was trying to figure out how to manage this unexpected development, how to reassert control over a narrative that had suddenly shifted away from her. My father was making his way toward us, weaving between tables with purpose. His face was a mask of forced pleasantness, but I recognized the tension in his shoulders. He stopped at our table, nodding at Daniel with exaggerated politeness. "Daniel, is it? That was quite an unexpected speech." His eyes flicked to me briefly before returning to Daniel. "Caroline, we need to talk." "About what?" I kept my voice level. "About what just happened." He gestured toward the stage. "This is Victoria's wedding, and I think you should have checked with her before accepting such a public proposal. It is a bit inappropriate to draw attention away from the bride on her special day." There it was. The familiar pattern of my family's behavior, wrapped in reasonable-sounding language. I was being blamed for disrupting Victoria's moment, even though I had done nothing but stand next to Daniel while he spoke. The attention he had given me was somehow my fault, my responsibility to manage so as not to overshadow my sister. Daniel stood, his posture shifting subtly. "With all due respect, sir, I was the one who chose to speak. Caroline did not ask for attention. She was simply being gracious enough to accept a legitimate business proposition. Still, this is a family event, and these things should be handled privately." My father's smile was strained. "I am sure you understand." "What I understand is that your daughter spent this entire evening sitting alone in a corner while everyone else celebrated, including her own family." Daniel's voice remained polite, but there was an edge to it now. "I offered her the professional respect she deserved. If that makes people uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why acknowledging Caroline's value feels like a threat to Victoria's happiness." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. My father's face reddened, and I saw several nearby guests turning to watch this confrontation unfold. This was not how these events were supposed to go. At family weddings, everyone maintained appearances, swallowed their grievances, pretended everything was perfect. Daniel was breaking those unspoken rules, and my father clearly had no idea how to respond. "Perhaps we should discuss this another time," my father said finally, his tone clipped. He looked at me, and there was something in his expression I could not quite read. Anger, certainly, but also maybe a hint of uncertainty. "Caroline, we will talk later." He walked away, and I released a breath I had not realized I was holding. Daniel sat back down, reaching across the table to touch my hand again. Are you okay?" "I think so." My hands were shaking slightly. That was not how I expected this evening to go. "Are you regretting it?" I thought about the question carefully. Part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to retreat back to my safe invisibility, where I did not make waves or cause problems. But another part of me, a part I had kept buried for years, was thrilled by what had just happened. Daniel had forced my family to see me, to acknowledge that I had value beyond just being Victoria's less successful sister. "No," I said finally. "I do not regret it." "Good." Daniel smiled. "Because the evening is not over yet." "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, the DJ announced that the bride would be throwing her bouquet, inviting all unmarried women to gather near the dance floor. I watched Victoria take her position, bouquet in hand, a practiced smile on her face. Her bridesmaids assembled with the other single women, laughing and jostling each other playfully. "You should join them," Daniel said. "I do not think so." "Why not? You are unmarried. You are eligible. And I think it would make an interesting statement." He stood, pulling me to my feet. "Come on, let us see how this plays out." "Daniel, I really do not want to." But he was already guiding me toward the group, and I found myself swept along by his momentum and the champagne and the surreal nature of the entire evening. I stood at the edge of the group of women gathered for the bouquet toss, feeling conspicuously out of place. Victoria's bridesmaids dominated the front row, their designer dresses and perfect hair making them look like they had stepped out of a magazine spread. I hung back, not wanting to participate, but also not wanting to appear rude by walking away. Victoria climbed onto a small platform the staff had set up, her bouquet held high. She surveyed the assembled women with an expression I knew well, that look of calculated assessment she used when evaluating situations for maximum advantage. Her eyes landed on me, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation that I had dared to join the group. "Are we ready?" Victoria called out, her voice bright and performative. The crowd cheered encouragement. She turned her back to us, counting down from 3. On 1, she tossed the bouquet over her shoulder in a high arc. I watched it tumble through the air, ribbons trailing, white roses and greenery spinning in the light. It seemed to move in slow motion, and I tracked its path with detached interest. It was heading toward the front row, where the bridesmaids were positioned with their arms raised, ready to catch. But then one of the bridesmaids, a tall blonde in champagne silk, stumbled backward in her heels. She bumped into the woman beside her, creating a domino effect that disrupted the entire front row. The bouquet sailed past their outstretched hands and continued toward the back of the group. Toward me. I raised my hands instinctively, more to protect my face than to catch, but the bouquet landed in my arms as neatly as if someone had placed it there deliberately. The stems were cool against my skin, the flowers still fresh and fragrant. A beat of stunned silence followed, then the crowd erupted in applause and laughter. I stood frozen, holding the bouquet, while Victoria's bridesmaids turned to stare at me with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed irritation. Someone pushed me forward, and suddenly I was at the front of the group, visible to everyone in the ballroom. Daniel was there immediately, grinning. "Well, that is interesting timing." Victoria's smile had gone rigid. She climbed down from the platform and approached me, her movements measured and controlled. Up close, I could see the strain around her eyes, the tightness in her jaw that suggested she was working hard to maintain her composure. "Caroline," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "What a surprise. Just lucky, I guess." I held up the bouquet, unsure what else to do with it. "Yes, lucky." Victoria's gaze flicked to Daniel, then back to me. "We should talk, privately." "Now?" I glanced around at the crowd still watching us. "Is that appropriate?" This is your reception. The subtle jab landed. Victoria's smile tightened further, but she could not abandon her gracious bride persona in front of so many witnesses. Of course. Later then. Maybe we can have lunch next week. I am afraid Caroline already has a lunch meeting scheduled, Daniel interjected smoothly. With me. To discuss the consulting project. Of course. Victoria's laugh sounded forced. How wonderful that you two have connected. Family is so important, is it not? I am thrilled that Caroline is finally getting some recognition for her work. The words were perfect, supportive and loving, but I heard the subtext underneath. Victoria was not thrilled. She was calculating, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage I had somehow caused to her perfect narrative. Gregory appeared at Victoria's side, his expression concerned. Everything okay here? Wonderful, Victoria said, her smile brightening. My sister just caught the bouquet. Is that not exciting? Gregory looked at me as though seeing me for the first time all evening. Caroline, right? Congratulations. And that business opportunity Daniel mentioned sounds fantastic. We should all get together sometime, compare notes about working with this guy. He clapped Daniel on the shoulder with easy familiarity, and I realized that Gregory probably had no idea about the family dynamics at play. To him, I was just Victoria's sister, another family member who deserved polite acknowledgement. The exclusion and dismissal I had experienced all evening had been so subtle, so carefully managed, that someone from outside the family would never notice. That would be great, I said, playing along with the pretense. The DJ announced the garter toss, and the group dispersed as the unmarried men assembled on the dance floor. Victoria and Gregory moved away, absorbed back into their celebration. I stood holding the bouquet, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. Daniel guided me back to table 37, away from the chaos of the garter toss. I set the bouquet on the table, staring at it as though it were a strange artifact from someone else's life. This is insane, I said quietly. Which part? Daniel settled into his chair, looking remarkably pleased with himself. All of it. You showing up, the speech, the consulting offer, and now this. I gestured at the bouquet. It feels like the universe is playing some kind of elaborate joke. Or maybe the universe is just correcting an imbalance. Daniel leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Caroline, what happened tonight was not random. I saw you standing alone, invisible to your own family, and I decided to do something about it. The bouquet toss was legitimately chance, but everything else? That was intentional. But why? You do not know me. Why would you care about my family situation? Daniel was quiet for a moment, studying me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Because about 5 years ago, I was at a similar family event. My older brother's wedding, actually. I had just started my company, taking a huge risk by leaving the family business to strike out on my own. My father spent the entire evening telling everyone how disappointed he was in my choices, how I was throwing away my future for some foolish entrepreneurial fantasy. He paused, his jaw tightening at the memory. I spent most of that wedding in a corner, avoiding my family, feeling like a failure. And not one person came to talk to me. Not one person suggested that maybe my father was wrong, that maybe I had value independent of his approval. I vowed that if I ever saw someone in a similar situation, I would do something about it. So this is about your brother's wedding? This is about recognizing when someone deserves better than what they are getting. He smiled, but there was sadness in it. Your family has convinced you that you do not matter, Caroline, but they are wrong. And I wanted to make sure you knew that, even if it disrupted their perfect celebration. The music swelled as the garter toss concluded, and guests began returning to the dance floor. Victoria and Gregory were in the center of it all, dancing again, their moment of concern about me apparently forgotten. My parents had rejoined their friends, no doubt already crafting a narrative about how my unexpected prominence tonight was somehow part of their plan all along. What happens now? I asked Daniel. Now you have choices. He stood, offering his hand once more. You can go back to being invisible, or you can embrace the fact that people saw you tonight, really saw you, and some of them might actually care. I looked at his extended hand, thinking about everything that had changed in the past few hours. I thought about the years I had spent making myself small, accommodating my family's narrative, accepting their diminished view of my worth, and I thought about how it felt to stand on that stage, to hear Daniel describe my work with respect, to catch a bouquet that symbolized possibility. I took his hand. The reception continued around us, but I felt like I was watching it from a great distance, separated from the celebration by an invisible barrier that Daniel had somehow created. He led me to the dance floor, and despite my protests that I was not a good dancer, he pulled me into an easy waltz that required little skill, but projected confidence to anyone watching. They are all staring at us, I murmured, acutely aware of the attention. Let them stare. Daniel's hand was steady on my waist, guiding me through the steps. You have spent the entire evening trying to disappear. It is time they remembered you exist. Over his shoulder, I could see Victoria dancing with one of Gregory's groomsmen. She kept glancing in our direction, her expression carefully neutral, but her body language tense. My mother stood near the edge of the dance floor, talking animatedly with several other women, but her eyes tracked my movements with an intensity that made me nervous. When the song ended, Daniel did not release me immediately. Instead, he leaned in close enough that only I could hear him. Are you ready for the real surprise? There is more? There is always more. He smiled mysteriously. Come with me. We left the ballroom through a side door, entering a quiet hallway that led to the hotel's administrative offices. Daniel seemed to know exactly where he was going, and I followed, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He stopped at a door marked private and knocked twice. The door opened to reveal a small conference room that had been converted into a temporary office space. Inside, a woman in an elegant pantsuit sat at a table covered with papers and a laptop. She looked up as we entered, her expression professional but warm. Caroline, this is Jennifer, my executive assistant. Daniel gestured between us. Jennifer has been helping me with something special tonight. It is nice to meet you, Jennifer said, standing to shake my hand. Daniel has told me a lot about you. He has? I looked between them, confused. We only met a few hours ago. True, but I am a quick study. Daniel pulled out a chair for me at the table. Caroline, I need to tell you something, and I need you to keep an open mind while I explain. My stomach twisted. This sounds ominous. It is not ominous. It is just complicated. He sat down across from me, his expression more serious than I had seen it all evening. When I said I came to this wedding because I do business with Gregory, that was true. But it was not the whole truth. What do you mean? I mean, I specifically came to this wedding because I knew you would be here. He held up a hand before I could interrupt. Let me explain. 3 weeks ago, Gregory was showing me some preliminary designs for a project we are collaborating on. His office is in a building that overlooks the street where your bookstore is located. I saw you through the window, talking with customers, arranging a display. You looked genuinely happy, engaged with what you were doing. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I asked Gregory about the bookstore, and he mentioned it was owned by someone he was connected to through his wife. That started a conversation about Victoria and their upcoming wedding, and he mentioned in passing that her sister worked there. He said it so dismissively, like it was barely worth noting, that it stuck with me. So you came to the wedding to meet me? The idea seemed absurd. I came to the wedding to see if my instinct was correct. Daniel leaned forward. I have built my career on reading situations, understanding dynamics that others miss. Something about the way Gregory talked about you, about Victoria's family in general, suggested there was more to the story. When I saw you hiding behind that column, completely invisible to everyone including your own parents, I knew I was right. Jennifer cleared her throat gently. Daniel asked me to do some research about your sister's business dealings, your parents' investments, the family dynamics. What I found was interesting. She turned the laptop to face me, showing a detailed spreadsheet with numbers and dates that meant nothing to me at first glance. Your sister has been embezzling from your parents for the past 2 years, small amounts at first, then larger transfers as she got bolder. She has been using the money to maintain her lifestyle while telling your parents her pharmaceutical sales job pays better than it actually does. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process this information. How do you know this? Because your mother mentioned their accountant by name during the reception, Daniel said. Jennifer has connections in the financial sector. It took her about 2 hours to confirm what I suspected based on things Gregory had inadvertently mentioned about Victoria's spending habits versus her actual income. Why are you telling me this? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Because you deserve to know the truth about your family. Daniel's expression was intense. And because knowledge is power, especially when your family has spent years diminishing you. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the evidence Jennifer had compiled. Bank statements, transaction records, a paper trail that painted a very different picture of Victoria than the successful, put-together woman everyone celebrated tonight. My perfect sister, the golden child, had been stealing from our parents to fund her perfect life. This does not make sense, I said finally. Victoria has a good job. Why would she need to steal? Because good is not enough for her. Daniel's voice was matter-of-fact. Everything about Victoria is about appearances, about maintaining an image. Real success takes time and hard work, but she wanted the appearance of success immediately, so she took shortcuts. Jennifer tapped on the laptop, pulling up another document. This is particularly interesting. 3 months ago, Victoria transferred a significant amount of money from your parents' investment account to pay for wedding expenses. She told your parents the money was a loan from Gregory's family, when in fact she just stole it. My parents do not know. I thought about all the pride in my father's voice during his toast, the way my mother had beamed at Victoria throughout the evening. They have no idea, Jennifer confirmed. Their accountant discovered the discrepancies last week and has been trying to reach them, but Victoria intercepted the messages. She has been delaying the conversation, hoping to figure out a way to cover her tracks. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching me carefully. Caroline, I am giving you this information because I think you deserve to know the truth. But what you do with it is entirely your decision. You can confront Victoria, tell your parents, or walk away and let it all play out naturally. Why do you care? The question burst out of me, sharper than I intended. You showed up at this wedding, made me visible, offered me a job opportunity, and now you are telling me my sister is a criminal. What do you get out of this? What do I get out of this? Daniel's expression softened. I get to watch someone who has been pushed down their entire life finally have the tools to stand up. I get to disrupt a system that rewards the wrong people for the wrong reasons. And honestly, I get satisfaction from knowing I made a difference. That sounds too altruistic to be real. Maybe it is. He shrugged. Or maybe I just really hate watching good people be treated poorly by their families. My therapist would probably say I have unresolved issues with my own father that I am projecting onto your situation. Either way, the information is real, and the choice is yours. I looked at the laptop screen again, at the numbers that represented my sister's betrayal, not just of our parents, but of the entire image she had cultivated. Victoria had built her perfect life on a foundation of lies and theft, and everyone had believed her because she was so good at performing success. What would you do? I asked Daniel. If you were me? I would make sure Victoria understood that she is not as clever as she thinks she is. His eyes held a hint of steel. but I would do it in a way that gave your parents the dignity of discovering the truth themselves, rather than learning it through a public confrontation. Jennifer pulled out a folder from her bag and slid it across the table to me. Everything you need is in here. Copies of the transaction records, the accountant's contact information, and a timeline of when each theft occurred. If you choose to use it, give it to your parents after the honeymoon. Let them have their moment of happiness before their world falls apart. I took the folder, feeling its weight in my hands. This was more than just information. This was ammunition. A weapon I could use to destroy Victoria's carefully constructed life. The same sister who had excluded me from her wedding party, seated me behind a column, never once acknowledged my existence all evening, now had her entire future in my hands. I need to think about this, I said, standing up. The folder felt like it was burning through my skin. Of course. Daniel stood as well. Take all the time you need. The information will be just as valid tomorrow as it is tonight. We returned to the ballroom, where the reception was winding down. Many guests had already left, and the remaining people clustered in small groups, finishing their drinks and saying goodbyes. Victoria and Gregory were by the exit, thanking people as they departed, still playing their role as the perfect couple. Daniel walked me to the coat check, where I retrieved my jacket and the bridesmaid gift bag that Victoria had left for all the women in the family. Inside was a silk scarf, probably expensive, certainly impersonal. I held it in one hand and the folder Jennifer had given me in the other, weighing them against each other like competing versions of my future. You do not have to decide tonight, Daniel said quietly. But you do have to decide who you want to be going forward. The person who stays invisible to keep the peace, or the person who demands to be seen. Those are not the only two options. True, but in my experience, they are the two most common. He handed me a business card with his personal cell phone number written on the back. Call me when you are ready to talk about the consulting project, or when you just need to talk, period. Either way, I meant what I said earlier. This connection is real. I slipped the card into my jacket pocket along with the folder, then looked back at Victoria one last time. She caught my gaze across the ballroom and smiled, a brittle expression that did not reach her eyes. She knew something had changed tonight, but not the full extent of it. Not yet. I did not call my parents immediately. I did not confront Victoria the next morning, or create a scene that would give her ammunition to paint me as bitter or jealous. Instead, I waited. I went to work at the bookstore, organized inventory, helped customers find the perfect books, and thought about what kind of person I wanted to be when I finally wielded the power I now possessed. 3 days after the wedding, I met with Daniel at his downtown office. The space was modern and impressive, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Elliott Bay and the surrounding city. He greeted me warmly, introducing me to several members of his development team and walking me through the preliminary designs for the mixed-use property he had mentioned at the reception. The project was real. Everything he had said about wanting my input was genuine. We spent 2 hours discussing how to create retail spaces that fostered community connection, how to integrate literary and artistic elements into commercial design. Daniel listened to my ideas with the same attention he had given me at the wedding, making notes and asking thoughtful questions. This could actually work, I said, studying the architectural renderings spread across the conference table. If you are serious about prioritizing community over pure profit maximization. I am always serious about my projects, Daniel replied. And I think you would be an excellent addition to the consulting team. The offer stands, if you want it. I accepted, not because Daniel had given me ammunition against my sister, but because the opportunity was legitimate, and I was tired of letting fear hold me back from pursuing what I actually wanted. I signed a consulting agreement that afternoon, with a generous fee that would allow me to reduce my hours at the bookstore and focus on developing this new aspect of my career. 2 weeks later, I invited my parents to lunch at a quiet restaurant near their home. They seemed surprised by the invitation, my mother particularly confused about why I wanted to meet without Victoria present. I let them order, made small talk about the wedding and their recent activities, and then placed Jennifer's folder on the table between us. "What is this?" My father picked it up, frowning. "Information about Victoria's financial activities over the past 2 years. I kept my voice calm and factual. "I think you should review it carefully, and then contact your accountant." I watched the color drain from my mother's face as she leaned over to read the first page. My father's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to a slow burning anger that made his hands tremble. They did not speak for several long minutes, just turned pages and read transaction records that documented their daughter's systematic theft. "Where did you get this?" My father's voice was barely controlled. "Does it matter?" I met his gaze steadily. "Is any of it untrue?" He could not answer that, because the documents spoke for themselves. Victoria had stolen over $100,000 from them, money she had used to furnish her penthouse, buy her designer wardrobe, and pay for portions of her wedding that she claimed Gregory's family had covered. "Why are you showing us this?" My mother's voice was small, broken. "Victoria is your sister. And you are my parents." I leaned forward, but both of those relationships have been one-sided for years. Victoria has treated you like an ATM while treating me like an embarrassment. I thought you deserved to know the truth before you continued funding her lifestyle. "We need to talk to her," my father said, already reaching for his phone. "You do." I stood, preparing to leave. "But I would recommend having your accountant present when you do. Victoria is very good at explaining things away, and you will want documentation to counter her stories." I left them at the restaurant, both of them still staring at the folder like it contained some kind of impossible revelation. I felt neither triumph nor guilt, just a strange sense of completion. I had given them the information they needed. What they did with it was their choice. Victoria called me 2 days later, her voice shaking with rage. "You destroyed my relationship with Mom and Dad. They are demanding I pay everything back. Gregory is furious because I lied to him about the wedding costs. You ruined my life." "I gave them information," I corrected calmly. "You ruined your own life by stealing from them. I just made sure they knew the truth." "After everything I did for you." "What did you do for me, Victoria? Put me behind a column at your reception? Forget to mention me in your speech? Spend our entire lives convincing our parents I was less valuable than you?" I paused. "I think we are done pretending to be sisters now. You can stop performing, and I can stop being invisible." She hung up on me, and I never heard from her again. My parents paid their own money back to themselves from Victoria's accounts, which meant she lost her penthouse and had to move to a much smaller apartment in a less prestigious neighborhood. Gregory filed for an annulment 6 months later, citing fraud in the inducement, when he learned the extent of Victoria's deception. She lost her job when the company discovered she had been inflating her sales numbers the same way she inflated everything else in her life. Without the stolen money to prop up her image, Victoria's carefully constructed world collapsed completely. My parents cut off all financial support and refused to speak to her, the disappointment and betrayal too deep for easy forgiveness. Meanwhile, I thrived. The consulting project with Daniel opened doors I had never imagined walking through. I became known in Seattle's development community as someone who understood how to create spaces that served communities rather than just extracting profit from them. My work at the bookstore evolved into something bigger, and within a year I was offered a position directing cultural programming for an entire district of the city. Daniel and I remained close, though our relationship never became romantic. He had been right that night at the wedding. Sometimes what people need most is just to be seen, truly seen, by someone who recognizes their value. Looking back on that evening when I stood behind a marble column, invisible and forgotten, I understood that Daniel had not rescued me. He had simply held up a mirror that forced everyone else to see what had been there all along. The revenge I took on Victoria was not about destroying her. It was about refusing to remain invisible while she built her empire on lies. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply insisting on being valued for exactly who you are, and walking away from anyone who suggests you deserve less.